The 4 gunshots rang out inside the diner at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, and by the time the smoke cleared, waitress Bianca Solheim lay on the tile floor bleeding from wounds meant for a 72-year-old woman she'd shoved out of the way 1 second before impact, and the man now cradling both women in his arms was about to make a decision that would change every life in that room forever. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment to like this video, drop a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Inspire, because what you're about to hear is a story about courage that asked for nothing in return. Bianca was 26 years old, working the morning shift at a modest diner called the Copper Spoon on the outskirts of a mid-sized city, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a bell over the door that jingled every time someone walked in. She'd been a waitress there for 3 years, ever since dropping out of a nursing program when her mother's medical bills became more than either of them could manage. Bianca carried herself with a quiet steadiness that regular customers noticed immediately, the sort of calm competence that made people feel cared for even when she was simply refilling their coffee. She worked 6 days a week, sent most of her paycheck home to help with her mother's care, and had long ago stopped imagining her life would look any different than this. Among her regulars was an elderly woman named Adeline Marchetti, 72 years old, who came in every Tuesday morning at exactly 11 o'clock for tea and toast, always sitting in the same corner booth by the window. Adeline was soft-spoken, elegant in an understated way, with silver hair always pinned neatly and a habit of tipping generously despite ordering modestly. Bianca had grown fond of her over the months, the way you grow fond of any regular who treats you like a person rather than a service. What Bianca didn't know, because Adeline never once mentioned it, was that she was the mother of Cassius Marchetti, a man whose name carried significant weight in circles far removed from quiet diner breakfasts, a man whose business dealings had made him powerful enemies over many years. That particular Tuesday morning began like any other, sunlight streaming through the diner's front windows, the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filling the air, a handful of regulars scattered across the booths. Bianca had just set down Adeline's tea when 2 men in dark jackets walked through the door, and something in the way they moved, quick and purposeful, made her instincts flare before her mind fully registered the danger. One of them raised a pistol toward the corner booth, toward Adeline, and Bianca didn't calculate risk or consequence, she simply moved, throwing herself between the gun and the elderly woman she'd served tea to every Tuesday for the better part of a year. The bullets meant for Adeline tore into Bianca instead, 4 of them, and she crumpled to the tile floor as chaos erupted around her, chairs overturning, customers screaming and diving for cover, the gunmen fleeing as quickly as they'd arrived once their target had been shielded by an unexpected obstacle. Adeline dropped to her knees beside Bianca, screaming for someone to call an ambulance, pressing her own trembling hands against wounds she didn't know how to treat, begging the young woman to stay awake, to keep breathing, to not let this be the price of a kindness she'd never asked for. Cassius Marchetti arrived at the hospital 11 minutes after receiving the call, having driven through red lights and stop signs with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. He was 44 years old, a man accustomed to controlling every variable in his world, accustomed to being feared rather than grateful, and he found himself standing in a sterile hospital hallway feeling utterly powerless for perhaps the first time in his adult life. His mother sat in a plastic chair outside the operating room, still in shock, repeating over and over that a stranger had taken bullets meant for her, that she didn't even know the girl's last name until the paramedics asked. Bianca survived surgery, though barely, 2 of the 4 bullets having caused significant internal damage that kept her in critical condition for the following 72 hours. Cassius did not leave the hospital during that entire time. He sat in the waiting room in his expensive suit, looking entirely out of place among the vending machines and worn magazines, refusing every suggestion from his associates that he return to handle the obvious retaliation his organization required. His mother sat beside him for most of those hours, and in the quiet space between fear and hope, she told him everything she knew about Bianca, the mother with medical bills, the abandoned nursing dreams, the quiet dignity with which this young woman had served her tea every Tuesday without ever once knowing who she truly was. When Bianca finally woke on the 4th day, disoriented and weak, the first face she saw clearly was Adeline's, still sitting faithfully beside her hospital bed, holding her hand with a grip that spoke of gratitude too large for words. Cassius stood near the window, having stepped back to give the women space, watching this young waitress who had nearly died for a stranger slowly blink her way back into consciousness. He introduced himself properly for the first time, explaining who he was, what his mother meant to him, and the debt he now carried that no amount of money could ever fully repay. Bianca, still groggy from medication, simply said she would have done the same for anyone, that Adeline had always been kind to her, and that kindness, in her mind, didn't require knowing someone's whole story to deserve protecting. Over the following weeks, as Bianca slowly recovered in a private recovery suite Cassius insisted on providing, something began shifting between them that neither had anticipated. He visited daily, at first simply to check on his mother's savior, then increasingly because he found himself drawn to conversations with a woman who spoke to him without an ounce of fear or flattery, who asked about his childhood rather than his business, who seemed entirely unimpressed by wealth or power and interested only in the person underneath it. Bianca, in turn, found herself looking forward to these visits more than she wanted to admit, drawn to a man whose reputation suggested hardness but whose actual presence, in quiet hospital rooms during ordinary daylight hours, revealed someone gentler and more thoughtful than the stories about him ever hinted. Autoline, for her part, treated Bianca less like a stranger who'd saved her life and more like the daughter she'd always wanted but never had, visiting almost as often as her son, bringing homemade soup and stories of Cassius as a small boy, gently and unmistakably encouraging whatever was blossoming between the two of them. She told Bianca, during one particularly quiet afternoon, that in 72 years of living she had learned that true character reveals itself in the half-second before thinking, in the instinct to protect rather than flee, and that she had witnessed exactly that instinct save her own life without a moment's hesitation. If this story is touching your heart right now, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment sharing your thoughts, because what happens next reminds us that real love often grows from the most unexpected soil. By the time Bianca was fully recovered, nearly 2 months after the shooting, Cassius had quietly ensured her mother received the finest medical care available, had settled every outstanding bill without ever making Bianca feel indebted for it, and had visited her modest apartment often enough that neighbors began to whisper about the well-dressed stranger who always seemed to be smiling by the time he left. He proposed to her on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, in the same corner booth at the Copper Spoon where his mother had nearly died, sunlight streaming through the same window, no grand gesture or elaborate spectacle, simply a ring placed gently on the table between them and a question asked with more vulnerability than a man of his position had shown to anyone in years. He told her that he wasn't proposing out of debt or obligation, that he'd fallen in love with her steadiness, her humor, the way she made ordinary moments feel significant, and that his mother's survival had simply been the door through which he'd found the rest of his life. Bianca said yes, not because a powerful man had asked, but because somewhere in those 2 months of quiet hospital visits and honest conversations, she had genuinely fallen for the person Cassius revealed himself to be when no one was watching, a son devoted enough to sit in uncomfortable waiting room chairs for days, a man capable of gentleness that his public reputation never suggested existed. Before this story ends, if it moved you even a little, please comment the word courage below, because sometimes the bravest act of kindness becomes the doorway to a love we never saw coming. They married 3 months later in a small ceremony attended mostly by Audeline's closest friends and Bianca's recovering mother, the same corner booth diner catering the reception with the same coffee and toast Adeline had ordered every Tuesday for years. Bianca never returned to waitressing, not because Cassius asked her to stop, but because she chose instead to finally pursue the nursing degree she'd abandoned years earlier, this time with every resource available to actually finish it. Adeline, 72 years old and very much alive because of one waitress's instinct to protect a stranger, walked her new daughter-in-law down the aisle herself, insisting that the woman who had given her a second chance at life deserved nothing less than to be family in every sense of the word. What began with 4 bullets meant to end a life instead became the beginning of 3 lives rewoven together, proof that the smallest, bravest choices we make in half a second can ripple forward into decades of unexpected, undeserved, and entirely earned joy.